Hi, welcome, Chris Stoddard, to this. I don't know what this podcast Zoom of epic proportions. That's what we're doing. So I'm interviewing Chris today, and Chris is going to be starting at Des Moines University this fall in fall 2020. So I guess, Chris, before we get started, I didn't even think about this, but now I need to know. Um, you're moving out there. Is it going to be live classes for fall?
So they're planning on it right now. They said
Mhm.
everyone's just going to wear a mask and social distancing. So unless anything happens, we'll be in the classroom. But like most med schools, they still will record it and you can watch it two
Yeah.
times at home. So I'm sure they'll have both options.
I have heard too that if you're going to be kind of online school in med school, like the first year is like the year to do it kind of. I mean,
Yeah,
it's annoying, but you can do it.
but you
So,
can get through it.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I hope that I have both options.
Yeah, totally. So tell me, so why did you pick Des Moines?
So I had actually been accepted to Rocky Vista in St.
Hmm.
George. And I wasn't even
And
going
you're
to go.
from Utah, so.
Yeah,
Hmm.
from Utah, family's here, mom both sides. My wife's family is here as well. I wasn't even going to go to the Des Moines interview, but thinking about it, my wife convinced me. I'll just go and check it out. And when I went there, it was just so incredible. Like just the atmosphere, the teachers, the culture that they had, and they really focused on like the family. Not just the students, but the family of the students. And Iowa in general is just like the Midwest, super friendly, and it just felt like almost a better fit. And the other reason is they've been around a little bit longer than Rocky Vista. They're the second oldest DO program in the nation. And so they've got more connections established for rotations, for residency placements. So I was thinking, in the long run, those connections might be more helpful. And so overall, it was just an awesome vibe. And surprisingly, we've had a lot of doctors that graduated from DMU and we've loved them. And so they set a precedence, and then going and interviewing there set another, huge standard. And so overall, we just got convinced to switch. And that's kind of the main reason that we win. And it's also nice. I think I particularly wanted to move out of Utah and get, experience outside of Utah. Maybe we'll be back, maybe we won't, but at least see for myself, what it's like to do school outside. So those are kind of the three main reasons that I decided for Iowa.
Now, so if I understand right, though, you had put money down at Rocky Vista. Is that
Yeah.
true?
No, I paid the first deposit.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things where you're going to lose money if you get accepted to a school you like better.
Mm-hmm.
I had already kind of like written it off.
Mm.
But luckily, Rocky Vista is really good. I mean, when I interviewed there, I loved it, so much as well. But they're really good with their deposits because they do the first one of 250 in November,
Mm.
and they do a 750, I think January-ish. So it's not quite the full 2,000 right out the gate. So
Mm-hmm.
I put 250 down, but so it wasn't too bad to cut my loss with that.
Oh, that's pocket change.
Yeah,
Right. It'll be fine.
better be.
Yeah, you're like, I could use it in the move, but. So tell me, why DO? Right?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of graduate or medical school applicants will do DO as a backup
Mm,
because have lower scores typically to get in and things like that, and it's kind of seen as like the second tier of med schools. But I had been talking with DOs before, and I kind of liked the approach that they had. Um, and for people who don't know what DOs do, there's kind of like two main systems of thought. There's one that's the actual osteopathic, it's the bone manipulation. And they kind of say that structure, works with form. And so, making sure the bones are in the right place will allow for everything else to function well, which, I can kind of understand, but it wasn't the main reason that approach. My approach was it's more of a look at the whole patient. It's more of a human approach. And like, there might be outside factors, social factors or psychological factors that can compound a medical disorder. And I've just heard stories about doctors who are just kind of check you in, do what they need to, get the procedure done, figure it out, and then, just pass you along. And your problems don't really become their problems. And maybe it's not the most professional thing, but I did want my patients' problems to be my problems. I wanted it to be something I figure out with them, something that I actually, work towards. So from the start of when I wanted to apply, I kind of focused on DO. one reason was I knew with a lower GPA, it would be harder to get into an MD program. But secondly, it was even if I'd gotten into an MD program, I really thought DO would be a better fit for me, my personality, and kind of like how they approach things. So one thing that I wanted to make sure with a DO program is that they didn't shortchange the curriculum. They didn't make it easier. They didn't make it, different. I wanted to get the same board scores as any MD program would. And so that is one thing that I liked about Rocky Vista and DMU. But even from the beginning, I've kind of liked that approach. There's a few things that I wanted to make sure were there in the program, but I did look for DO kind of out the gate.
So you mentioned that you applied with a little bit lower GPA. Do you mind kind of telling us?
Yeah, for sure. So like every freshman, you come in and you kind of like, what do I do? And it's all new, you're on your own. Well, I didn't have any motivation for school. I just didn't care. It was like, yeah, it's the next step, another academic institution. And so I did very bad. I did pretty bad. I failed mission prep just because I stopped going. And that's a hard feat, that I don't think there's a lot of people who do that.
Like an E, like a legit E.
Yeah,
okay.
The only one on my transcript, but it was mission prep. And I don't know, it was kind of like my approach is, if I'm not going to use it, I'm not going to care about it. And that's how I saw college at that point. And I just didn't care. I wasn't showing up for classes, skipping homework. So it was
Were
like.
your parents freaking out? I would be freaking out. Like my 8-year-old.
Yeah, they pulled funding and they're like, we're not going to pay for you to fail. And I was like, fine, I'll pay for myself to fail. And so then I paid for the second semester of failing.
You showed them.
I really showed them. No, and so like it was bad. And so I think I got on academic warning on the second semester. And so, that's where my GPA hit. And then I went on my mission. I served in Ghana. I came back and I was like, wow, education is actually super critical. I was like, I can actually do something. I can help someone if I learn right now. And so I got my act back together and I started, actually working on classes I actually cared at that point. And then, medicine came in and out from about that first semester, but it took a while for me to actually say, yeah, doctor, and that's what I want to be. And
do you think that maybe, I don't know, like, was it hard to kind of verbalize that, knowing that you had kind of dug yourself into a hole?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Like, it was like, I felt like I would love to be a doctor, but I can't because I'm already so far behind. And every doctor, my mindset was every doctor has a 4.0 since freshman year, and they get into Harvard Medical School, and that's how you have to be a doctor, which is absolutely not true. But that was my approach. And so for a lot of my years after my mission, when I was actually trying to do better, I thought about a PhD program. I thought about, nutrition and things like that. It all was around kind of medicine, but I always kind of shied away from doctor because I was like, I just can't, it's too much work. I don't want to take the MCAT, and things like that. And I shied away. And so really I just didn't learn enough. I didn't realize, all the things that go into an application.
You're like, oh, there's actually a lot more than just the GPA. I mean,
yeah.
Okay. So I guess, when did you decide to go for it? Right?
So yeah, this is a hilarious story. Because I was looking at different careers, and mainly it was careers I could make money out of school. And so I looked even at computer science, which is, completely in the opposite direction. And I took a class over the summer that was CS 142, the notorious intro computer science class. And I was doing great. I had an A in the class until the last week. And all of a sudden I failed the final project. Like I couldn't get it in on time and they wouldn't take any late work. And I was like, okay. And then I still had like, B plus managing, and I was still like, it was a really stupid policy in my opinion, but I should have had it in on time and things like that. I had most of the project done. And then I took the final and I failed the final, like a 30% fail. And I was like, at that point I came home, I was super discouraged. I was like, what am I doing? Like, where am I going to go? And I was like, at that point, I talked to my wife and I was like, we're just going to go for med school. Like, might as well, which is not usually what happens after you fail a test. You don't think, oh, med school, that's what I'm going to do. But, at that moment I was like, I was like, I've been kind of like avoiding med school, but I can do the DO school, because I thought it's a lower admission requirement. I can, work on the application, the essays, and really get it polished off and get in. And so then I was like, all right, let's go. And then I put all my effort into med school. I had a friend who is applying as well. And this was 2018, and I applied 2019. So I essentially had a year to get my application ready. Now I had done stuff like work experience and patient contact before, so that was helpful. I didn't have to cram it all into a year, but I got a lot done in that year before I applied. And so I talked to my friend. He just went off and he just told me like, okay, you need to have this, you need to have patient contact hours, you need to have shadowing hours. And he's like, what about this? What about that? And he kind of got me set up for a year of success in preparing my application. And so once I kind of clicked, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a doctor. And I went full, all the way in the deep end. And I just attacked everything because I knew I was working with little time and I didn't want to wait a year before I applied. And so I got shadowing in, I got more patient contact hours, I got volunteering in and all of that, And so it was a year before I applied that I finally decided, let's go, let's be a doctor.
So, certainly for those listening, I will say I'm glad it was successful for you, but don't do that. Right? Like, don't try and cram it into a year. Like, that sounds so hard. Like,
and this is the other thing is I couldn't cram it into a year. There's a lot of stuff that I had started before.
mm-hmm.
I was looking at PhD programs
Mm-hmm.
and I was looking at other things like that. And so I had work experience in a clinical setting.
Mm-hmm.
So by that point, I already had about 500 patient contact hours and I had already been volunteering. And so it wasn't like all of a sudden I got everything done in that year, but it was when I said that a year before I applied, I said, I still have a lot more to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I doubled up on my patient contact. I got more work hours. I got more volunteer hours. And then I started really shadowing. And my path, I don't think is the best path to follow, but I think one of the things I learned is I wish I would have shadowed more. Because it really sparked my love for medicine. Like if you are like, don't know about medicine and you're like, I kind of like it. It sounds like a cool idea, but I'm not sure. Go shadow someone that you think is the coolest job, a cardiologist, go watch a hip surgery, go watch anything, like do whatever it takes to get into the hospital, to scrub in, because when you see it, and if you either pass out, you got the wrong career. But if you are just talking about it for days after and you love it, and that's like the best motivation for me. Like when I was shadowing other doctors, I was like, this is awesome. This is what I want to do. And it helped me get that motivation to, do the extra work, to get behind it more. So I wish I would have shadowed a lot earlier.
That's such a good point. And I think it's kind of like, people don't love, but like setting up shadowing can be really difficult. And, like we're having this conversation during COVID, which so all shadowing is like done. So how did you manage to kind of find some really good shadowing opportunities? I think.
Oh, yeah. I talked to a bunch of my friends, and one of the coolest places, I wasn't able to shadow there, but one place that I wish I would have shadowed was in Lehigh. There was an orthopedic surgeon who was doing stem cell injections. That was cool. You saw the whole process. They'd come in, he'd take out the stem cells and he centrifuge it down, and then he'd inject it into wherever he was working on. And just hearing about that was super cool. I got in contact with them, but it just didn't work out with my schedule. So one of the biggest places that I found people was through my friends, in the med school community. And then the other thing is just go to your doctor, wherever you go. If you're an internist, if you're at family medicine, just talk to them. And they're all the time, they're like, yeah, I'll have you in. And for me, I wanted to do 10-hour days, however long you'd take me. I wanted to, get as much time. And if you start in like sophomore year or freshman year, then you can probably just do 1 to 2 hours every month, and you can get a ton of shadowing hours and a bunch of different experiences. But for me, I wanted to get as much as I could. So I'd ask for 10-hour blocks, or however much they would. You don't want to like impose on them. I got to know the physicians pretty well, and and they would let me come for a while. And so that was super nice. But Utah is kind of hard. There's a lot of people who are busy, and there's a lot of people who are asking to be shadowing. But I mean, you just got to get nosy. You got to get in there and ask. Because I think once you ask, especially people that know you, they'll be really inclined to help.
So, like as I've done more of these interviews, like one of the things that I kind of love is that I've started to see more important just how helpful and beneficial it is for like the applicant to like start talking about it to people, right? Like just to kind of like start saying, I'm going to do it. And
Yeah.
then like the opportunities kind of happen because you say, hey, how did you get that shadowing? How did,
Yes.
and because I would love it if we could say like, here's a list of shadowing opportunities for you. But like, I don't know, just with the amount of applicants we have, it's just not really like viable. And I think you also kind of hit on something really helpful is that when you know them, you typically have a kind of a better shadowing experience because you actually can talk to them a little bit better. So,
And you just got to get outside of yourself. The only other thing I'd say on shadowing is think outside of the Wasatch Front. Like if you can. I had a doctor that I knew in Arizona, and he was a psychiatrist, and I was like, I'll come down and shadow, and he let me shadow for, I came in for a week, off and on, just kept shadowing, and that was really awesome. And so I would say, like, if you're not from Utah, and you're gonna go home for the holidays, figure out a time, 2 or 3 days that you can shadow, and that's going to be a lot easier if it's your family doctor, they know your family, or if your family's had a surgery with someone. So.
Okay, so tell me, let's back to those grades. I just can't stop thinking about it, right? No, so if you wouldn't mind, like, so when you applied, what was your cumulative GPA?
Yeah, so I applied, I've got it right here. My cumulative GPA was a 3.34. So it's not, and
it could have been worse, right?
Oh yeah, it could have been. Like I'm just glad I didn't have a 3.0.
Okay. So 3.34. And then science was what?
Science was a 3.4.
Okay.
And so, it was definitely suboptimal. It got better, but I don't know, maybe I'm just not good at undergrad, maybe. I don't know. But, I worked as hard as I could to get those grades, and there's a few that I still didn't do as well as I thought, but I definitely brought it up from freshman year. Turns out it's hard to bring up a dragging GPA, but
yeah. So what was your MCAT score?
So my MCAT score was a 515.
Okay. So definitely, I guess you could say you were a splitter.
Yeah. And just to define for me splitter.
Oh, so a splitter, right? So your MCAT score's high, your GPA is low, right? Like one of those, you've got one of those things happening, right?
Yeah. And there's a reason, is because I was applying with 3.3.
Yeah.
I've got to at least get some score up. And so I hit the MCAT pretty hard. And I mean, it's not the best score, but it was definitely a better score than a lot of the people that I was applying to the same schools with. And so I really stood out with the MCAT, and I think that's what got me across the initial screening phase. That actually got me an interview. It's the MCAT score. So they're like, oh, he's not really got a GPA, but his MCAT's well. So they knew that I could buckle down and really get in. Well, at least that's what I think. I've never asked.
Yeah. Well, and that was really kind of my next question is like, so what do you think, like what activity did you participate in that you think helped you the most?
Yeah. I liked doing what no one else was doing personally. And so I think my volunteer, I'm going to say it's my volunteer because I thought it was the most interesting, but I actually volunteered at my wife's elementary school. And so I was teaching English for, people who are learning English as a second language. And I was also doing, helping out in the classroom. So I went every Friday for about 5 hours and just volunteered at the elementary school. And I don't think many other med school applicants have done that. So for me, I mean, I wanted to do something. If I could do it outside of medicine, I wanted to see that I wasn't trying to almost like make the application 100% medicine. I want to say like, I care about other aspects. And so my volunteering I did outside of medicine, and some of my employment was outside of medicine. I definitely wanted to say, like, I've had my experience in the medical field. I know what's going on. I know what I want, but I also wanted to expand outside. I wanted to have, someone, if they're reading my application, I wanted at least some of my experiences to be like, wow, we've never seen that,
Mm.
And so for me, I thought it was, volunteering at the elementary school. And the other place that I volunteered was an organization called Court Watch.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's more of a law school type of
But
spot.
it's so cool. So
I saw it in class, and they said they were taking volunteers, and I was like, that's probably something not a lot of medical applications, have. And so I went out and I volunteered for Court Watch, sitting in the courts and taking notes, and that was really awesome. And so there's, some of those experiences I think help, stand out. They're like, this guy's unique. He knows, kind of what he wants. He's, focused on people. He's focused on building those connections.
Mm. Is that how you kind of, because one of the things too with the med school application is that you kind of have to paint a picture of yourself so that they can kind of understand, right? Like I like to say, like, you provide a 3-dimensional image.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a collage because you have all your activities and all that stuff. So how did you kind of put, like, with all those different experiences, how did you kind of put them together to make them make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I see it more as like a story arc. Like you have to write your own character story arc.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have them start out and he doesn't know what he's doing, but then he figures it out, and then you have your hero at the end.
Well, you want that hero's journey, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
the growth and the transformation, all of that.
Mm-hmm. You're like a perfect applicant, you don't need it, but I needed a story's journey, a hero's journey,
No, I want everybody to talk about growth in their application always.
And so, like, my approach was I did a lot with mental health and with neuroscience, cognitive, mental, that type of pathway. So I shadowed a psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
I volunteered for NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. I did a bunch of my whole undergrad was that. And so I talked a lot about psychiatry. I talked a lot about mental health and things like that, and how I began to see, instead of saying like, oh, you're just too anxious, well, you should just get over it, to be like, well, you're actually needing, more medical assistance than just, self-help. And so that was one of those things of growth. And the other one was kind of focusing on the individuals who don't have the help from other institutions. So I gave an example in Ghana where this kid didn't have essentially legs. They were he had legs, but they were so diseased he couldn't walk on them. But we went everywhere. We looked for wheelchairs. We couldn't find anything. So, my statement was, if someone doesn't have an institution to back them up, to help them, that's where I want to be. And so I did with volunteering, like, a lot of these people who come and are language learners, English language learners, they don't always have the infrastructure. And so I was like, I want to be there to help them, adapt and learn English. And if the institution's not there, that's where I want to come in. So that was kind of my empathetic path. I also had the medical path of psychiatry. And so that's kind of how my story arc went. And I said, like, I only cared about myself here in my freshman year. I didn't care about, what impact I could make. And then after this experience in Ghana with this young boy, I realized, if I had the education at that point, if I had the medical knowledge, I could have made a huge difference rather than just feeling sorry for him. So that was.
I like that.
Yeah.
So, okay. So tell me this, like, for the freshman who's just starting.
Yes.
Like, what advice would you give him?
I think it's get out and shadow. Like, if you really want, like, if for me, it's funny. I took Tyler, my brother-in-law taught a class at BYU, and he taught career exploration. And it's the same thing he said there, like, get out, talk to someone, shadow them at their job. Even if it's not medicine, figure out what you are interested in and then start going down that path. And like I said earlier, if you go and you start shadowing and you watch a surgery, or you're in, the clinic for 10 hours one day, and you say, that was absolutely the worst thing I've ever done. I hated it. I can't stand blood, or there's all these people whining, that then medicine probably isn't for you. And that's a good, it's good to figure that out now. But for those who do want to go into medicine after that, usually it builds like almost this fire. It lights this fire underneath you, and you're like, if I end up anywhere else besides in the clinic or besides in the operating room, then I'll know I've missed what I really want. And so that really puts a fire. It did for me, at least. It put a fire underneath me to, say, get moving, get through the MCAT, get through this application, make it so you actually do get where you want to be. And so I think for freshmen, the first piece of advice I would give is get out and shadow someone, and it's hard, if you've never asked someone to shadow before, if it's all new, but the best medical applicants really get after it as soon as they can. And that's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice that I would get is just start, if you can, look for opportunities that make you uncomfortable. A bunch of the things I did, I was like, well, that's not really what I like, or that's not really what I do. And then I thought, well, if it's uncomfortable, it's probably good. It's probably shown, that I'm getting out there. And so a lot of the things that I did for patient contact, I wasn't comfortable at first, but after a while, I really grew to love it.
Oh, I love that. I've heard that a lot from medical schools where they've said, like, if the application just looks like literally they just went next door to get their volunteer experience, or then you're like kind of, get out, just try it. So I guess what would you give to what advice would you give to the person who's applying this year? Right? Like submitting right now, like, what do you kind of wish you would have known as you embarked on the application process?
I wish I would have talked, and this isn't always easy, but the intro to dental and medical school class, we had people who were actually on review boards come. And they talked to us about it. And I wish I would have realized how much people on the review boards care about your story. Like, you got to be real in your application. If it's just, you telling, it's almost like if you're writing it for just so you impress whoever's reading it, you're probably doing it wrong. What I would do is I would write as much as I could that was just who I am and what I've done and why I think I would be a good physician. And then afterwards, go through whatever my story was, whatever my narrative was, and then make it professional. I never wanted to cater almost to like a judgment bar. I just wanted to put myself out there in the best way possible and explain my growth. And then when they're reading it, it's actually real. I'm just trying to separate. I guess my advice would be separate yourself from the canned responses to the human experience. Make them realize that you are human, and that is a desirable trait. You're caring about other people. As a physician, you're going to be at the office later than everyone else just because you're helping patients. You got to make it look like you're not coming into being a physician for the money. That's a stupid decision anyways. You're not coming in to be a physician for the prestige, for any other reason besides, helping humanity and helping the patients you come across. So for me, it's like, I wanted my application to be as real as possible. But then even after I went through interviews and talked to the people who were interviewing me, I wish I would have done more of just explaining who I am and making it as, approachable as possible.
That is such good advice, and also a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
and it was a lot of uncomfortableness for me. I was putting myself out there. I was talking about the hardest parts of my life, my biggest triumphs, but I was just trying to say, I actually care. And the other kind of part of my application that we've talked a little bit about is, I tried to say, I'm coming from a disadvantaged, GPA. It was a self-inflicted disadvantage. And I said, regardless, I will be a doctor. I'm not going to stop, even if I don't get in. This is what I will do. And you'll see my application next year if I don't get in. That's kind of the other vibe I wanted to get across is I'm not going to stop.
You're I didn't take this decision lightly. So
yeah, exactly.
I love to tell people just kind of that med school application requires so much introspection, and kind of being willing to be mature and thoughtful about these experiences, that it's, you know, if I
And
had a dime for every time people will say, just tell me what they want to hear and I'll say it. I'm like, no,
that's
no.
exactly the opposite.
Yeah. I'm like, no, don't ever say that. So
Yeah. And I guess that's what I was trying to say. Maybe it was too wordy, but like,
no.
don't write for them.
Yep.
Yeah. Even though you're writing, they're going to read it. You can't write for them because that's what everyone else is doing.
Yep.
And you got to just explain why you're, just talk about yourself. It's kind of hard to explain, but you just got to really put yourself out there.
And it works. So
Yeah. I
anyway.
hope
Well,
works for me at least.
well, good luck at DMU. They are going to be lucky to have you there. So
I'm so excited.
we'll have to do a follow-up interview after you match in your residency and we'll figure out where you go, right?
That would be unreal. I would love that.
I know.
Okay.
So, all
Thank you
right.
so much.
Thank you.